welcome back once again, everyone, to the Not a Rabbi podcast. This is the podcast where we discover the unexpected in the Jewish tradition, or we try to anyway. And believe it or not, I finally nailed my tagline thanks to putting it up on the screen. Amazing. And now you know the secrets of recording, because my memory stinks. All right. As always, we'd like to start off with some gratitude. We'd like to thank the moderators of the Not a Rabbi, the unofficial, one second, what am I talking about? The Not a Rabbi Fifth Column podcast? No, get out of here. We're talking about the unofficial Fifth Column podcast Discord server. And we would like to thank the moderators for allowing me to have the show live in front of a studio audience here, as always. So thank you very much for letting me do that. Secondly, we would like to thank Logan for the intro music that he put together for me. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. And a third, actually, today, there is a listener who helped me with some doing the cover art for this episode. I hope you enjoy it. I kind of enjoyed it, even though I don't know if it had much to do with the subject that we're going to be talking about, but it looks awesome. So I hope you enjoy that as well. Okay, so what do we got going on today? Today we got to, we're going to do some feedback. I actually have a request from one of my students that I'm going to deal with as well. I forget which student it was, but that's just because, like I mentioned before, my memory is pretty shot. Then we're going to get into the main topic of the episode, which deals with the issue of converting to Orthodox Judaism and what that pertains and the like. So let's get into it. I hope everyone's doing well today. Also, I'd like to thank, as always, my listeners that are here live in the chat, or in the voice, whatever we call this thing, the video feed here for Discord. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you enjoy the show today. Okay, so feedback. A couple of episodes ago, we talked about the concept of Shabbos and what that is. I think that was the last episode, actually. And somebody had asked me a question, and that was regarding if there's, and I wish he were in the channel to ask me again and to remind me specifically what the question was. I'm going to paraphrase it because I didn't write it down. And that is about non-Jews at a Shabbos meal. Are there any problems? Are there any issues with regard to that? And to the best of my knowledge, there really aren't. There aren't any prohibitions against it, nor are there any... there are no prohibitions against it. You can certainly have that. I have had non-Jews over to my place for Friday night meals and Shabbos day meals sometimes. So as far as I'm concerned, it's not a problem. I would say that the one thing that I might want to point out is a potential matter of etiquette, which would be, if you're able to, if you're somebody that is not Jewish who is going to this somebody's house who is observant and Orthodox, and you're going to a Shabbos meal, try to put your phone on silent and try not to answer it unless there's an emergency. Obviously, if there's an emergency, that's something that can't be helped, and you should certainly do it. But it might be a bit of an issue otherwise. I mean, not an issue. People might not get upset, but just like I said, I think it's an etiquette issue more than anything else to try to be polite, especially if it's your first time. If you're somebody that goes often and they know you already and they're okay with it, then you can do as you see fit. But I don't think that there's really anything major that there is with regard to that. And like I said, I wish there were somebody else. I wish he were not somebody else, but I wish he were here in the live chat today. He is not, so that he could follow up, drill down, or correct me on the understanding that I had of the question. Unfortunately, he is not here, so we're going to go on from that. Now, any questions regarding that from the audience? Okay, so what next thing that we're going to talk about, that was shorter than I expected, really, but hey, that's how it goes sometimes. Next thing that we're going to talk about here is a request that one of my students asked me, and one of my students said, "Why aren't you talking about this? You should talk about this." And so here I am. I'm going to, since I usually don't give in to them in the middle of my classes, I'm going to give in to them now. And that is talking about something that happened last Sunday. And that was a special day on the Jewish calendar. I don't want to call it a holiday. Some people may, some people may not. I'm not going to do that. But it is a special day on the Jewish calendar. Right now we are in between the Passover holiday and the holiday known as Shavuos. And there is this 7-week period in that. Now, there is a commandment. I mean, this is going to get a little bit too into the weeds, but people have told me I should go to the weeds, so I'm going to do that. Now, that there is a commandment that we have generally when the temple was in existence and it should be rebuilt speedily, that on the first night of Passover, so the night of the 15th of the month of Nisan, the Jewish month of Nisan, there was something called the Omer taken. And that allowed for new wheat to be used and people to eat it. I'm going to just stop on that point. So nowadays what we do is we count 49 days, and this is something that the Bible in Leviticus talks about as well a little bit. We count 49 days which is a lead up to the holiday of Shavuos, and I'm going to try to talk a little bit more about Shavuos in the main portion of the show. So, but anyway, there was the 33rd day of the Omer was last Sunday, and that makes today the 40th day of the Omer, in case those of you who are math deprived, there you go. But what happened? What is significant about that day? And there are really two significant things that happened on that day. One of them the Talmud does speak about, and one of them is sort of a handed down, whether or not it's really, again, I'll get into that in a minute. I'll try to explain. So what does the Talmud talk about? The Talmud talks about that that Rabbi Akiva had 24,000 students. And during the course of the first 32 days between Passover and Shavuot, or Shavuos, however you want to call it, they all 24,000 died. Interesting understanding. There is somebody that explains this, and I'm not necessarily sure how reliable it is, but there is somebody that explains it, that they were all people that were involved in the Bar Kokhba revolt, which happened in, I think it was 133 BCE, something along those lines. I would have to endeavor to look that up if I had the ability. I mean, I have the ability, but if I had the time to do that, if I weren't talking. So anyway, all 24,000 students died, and they stopped dying. Well, they all died, so I guess they kind of had to stop dying. But the 33rd day was the day that they all stopped. The plague, or whatever it was that killed them all, it stopped. Rabbi Akiva actually went on to rebuild, as it were. He didn't get another 24,000 students, but he got 5 students, and those 5 students actually disseminated throughout the world, or throughout the Middle East, his teachings, and really kept things going throughout. So that is what one of the reasons for the holiday of, or not the holiday, but that special day of Lag BaOmer. It's easy to catch yourself and say things that you weren't supposed to want to be saying, because I don't consider, it's a nice day, beautiful day, but I don't consider it a holiday. Alrighty, anyway, so the second thing that goes on, or that is commemorated on the 33rd of the Omer, is and you'll see in a lot of Jewish communities these days, they're going to have bonfires. And this is actually in the commemoration of the anniversary of a person that was in the I would call him a Tana, or he is somebody that was part of that generation or that era where they were formulating the Mishnah. And again, for people that need terms, I would suggest going back to some of the other podcasts that I have, and you might be able to get some of those terms. Anyhow, and so his name was Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, Simon the son of Yochai, and he died on that day, the 33rd day of the Omer. And if you go if in Israel, there's actually where his grave is in a place called Meron. I've never been there myself, but there's a huge bonfire and generally celebrations that go on and singing and all sorts of stuff that goes on over there. There's lots of stories with Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. One of them that is, which kind of goes in conjunction with this story, is he was being chased by Roman. He was wanted, right, by the Romans for saying something not very nice about the Roman government, and he and his son were sequestered in a cave for 13 years. I think that was 13, right? For 13 years. And they survived. They survived specifically on just eating carobs alone. Okay, I can't eat carob, so I don't know how often I would have survived that. But that is, and then they came out, and there were certain things that happened throughout that time. So that is the story that's associated with it. Now, what's also interesting is that he is Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai is generally, I would say, associated with the book called the Kabbalistic book known as the Zohar. And the question is whether or not he actually wrote this or not. I would say that for the most part, most people will say he might not have written it per se. That might have been Moses Cordovero, if I'm not mistaken. I'm doing this off the top of my head, so I might have to publish some corrections later on. But the concepts that were given and written into the book were things that he had done or talked about and were handed down as sort of a tradition from him. So even though there wasn't necessarily him writing the book, they still went to, they count him as the author, as it were. So there is that. Like I said, lots of kids love the day, and they generally have if it's during the school week, if it's a day that there is school, they generally will have a lighter schedule. I'm always grateful when it comes out on a day that there is school, because that means, for the most part, I do not have to teach my high school classes because the high school is off that day, and I get to relax. And having an extra free day of not teaching is always something that I appreciate. So there we go with that. All right, any questions? If you have any questions from the audience with regard to this topic that we're talking about, or anything else really, you just feel free to drop that into the comments. This will get us quickly, and quicker than I expected, really, to the main topic of the episode, which is really the topic of, not really, but it is the topic of conversion. And this is an interesting time to be talking about the topic of conversion for a couple of reasons. One of them is, like I had mentioned before, the holiday of Shavuos is coming up. And one thing that happened on Shavuos is we received the Ten Commandments for that, on Shavuos, on the day, the 6th day of Sivan, which is again, a Hebrew month. Just quickly, I think I've talked about it before on one of the podcasts, but Jewish months are what I like to call pseudo-lunar, and because even though we do go based on the lunar calendar, there are some years where we actually throw an extra month in, so therefore we could kind of stay in sync with certain things. Because let's say, for example, Passover is supposed to be in the spring. It is called, one of the names of it is the holiday of springtime, Chag HaAviv. And so if we had a truly lunar calendar, that wouldn't necessarily be the case, where we would have the month of Nisan, we might have it in January. Sometimes it gets very early and it's in the middle, it's end of March, or even earlier sometimes. So we try to have we add an extra month in, I think it's like 7 out of 19 years, that's a 19-year cycle, something along those lines. Anyway, the Ten Commandments, so those are Jewish months. All right. So the Ten Commandments are given. What do the Ten Commandments have to do with conversion, you may ask? And that's an interesting question, because in a lot of ways, the template for the conversion process is based on what happened prior to receiving the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai. You'll see there that they had to go ahead and immerse their clothing, and the like. And then there's obviously the acceptance of all of the 613 commandments. So you have those two things, and those are two major things. There's also a requirement for men. There's the requirement for circumcision as well. How that because there was circumcision that was done, I think this is the point, and somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure, that this is that was something that was done at the beginning, where they all had to be circumcised as well, in order for the Paschal sacrifice in Egypt. Right? So anyway, in addition to that, right, in addition to the Ten Commandments, we also read the Book of Ruth, or as it's called in English, or called in Hebrew, I should say, Megillas Rus. And that talks about a woman who, by the name of Ruth, surprisingly enough, converted to become Jewish, and goes ahead and she actually winds up helping her mother-in-law get some land back and the like. It's an interesting story. There's a lot of rabbinic talk regarding what does this have to actually do with the holiday and the like, and you could have a lot of rabbinic discourse and sermons based on that as well. But since I'm not a rabbi, I will spare you a sermon. So anyway, so then what actually goes on here, right? So what goes on during a conversion process? Now, the reasons why somebody converts is, obviously personal, independent. I wouldn't say, most people are looking for something more, I would say, is what the main thing is, and they feel that Judaism has that for whatever reason. And I should point this out. Yes, there is another podcast out there called Ask a Jew, which is hosted by two women, and they'd had recently, a couple of episodes ago, they had they talked to somebody who had converted, and more than likely, I'll say, that had something to do with me doing this podcast. But it's also interesting because while I was on this Passover program that I spoke about 2 episodes ago, they actually had 2 people who converted talking about their experiences. So one was a former Mormon from Idaho. Was it Idaho? I think Idaho. And then the other gentleman, a gentleman who I didn't get his history. I was busy pushing my wife around in her wheelchair at the time. Like we mentioned, thank God she is better, and she's walking around now with a cane. And as my bad joke went, I don't have to push her around anymore. Okay. Anyway, so I lost my train of thought. Anybody want to remind me where I was up to here? Book of Ruth, right? We talked about that. Okay, so what goes on? All right, so I have a post to the Ask a Jew episode in the show notes, so you could listen to that if you are so inclined. Like I was saying, that the reasoning for people converting is multifaceted. There's a lot of different reasons as to why they'll convert. A lot of it has to do with feeling that Judaism is right for them for a specific reason. Now, generally, the quote unquote rule, although I don't think, is that people need to ask 3 times to convert. The first 2 times they are shunned and pushed away, and they are, at the 3rd time, they're generally accepted. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to convert right at that point in time, because the process can be, and is, from what I understand, very arduous and very difficult, especially these days, and I'll try to talk about why that is. I mean, not why that is, but, the Judaism is very interesting, where, in this fact, that we don't ask people to convert. We don't try to proselytize and try to get people to convert to our religion. It's something that is something that needs to be internal for the most part, and want to be Jewish, and want to make that effort to convert to Judaism. But it's not, we don't go out there and try to convert people to be Jewish. So that, and so what we do is, with this, once we tell them, once we say, okay, you want to be Jewish, then we start talking to them about what there is when you are Jewish. You got lots of anti-Semitism, lots of more responsibility on you, like I've spoken about with eating, keeping kosher, keeping Shabbos, observing those laws, observing the 613 laws that you have. Of course, some of them we can't do because of the temple not being around, and some of us can't do them because we are not in Israel as well. But there are various other laws that, there are a lot of responsibilities that you have. People don't like you. And, and especially these days, it's, we see what goes on with anti-Semitism. So it's even more so now. So, but what this is all about is that this is, and people might go ahead and turn away at that point, which is fine. And this goes back to back to the book of Ruth for a second, where in the book of Ruth, I believe it's in the 1st chapter, Naomi, who is the mother-in-law of Ruth, says to her, Ruth says to Naomi, I should say, I'll sleep where you sleep, I'll do this, and your God is my God. And this is all, this is like sort of again, a little bit of a template of how a conversion is supposed to go, where they have to understand that they have all these laws on them, and nevertheless, they're willing to accept these laws. And accepting the commandments, all of the commandments, is something that is an extremely, extremely important part of this. You always, you're not really necessarily allowed to convert just straight for your husband or your wife or your spouse, right? You're not allowed to do that. You're certainly not allowed to convert to Orthodox Judaism for the jokes either. You're not allowed, just so you can tell Jewish dentist jokes or something like that. Doesn't that's not how it goes. And for those of you who are wondering what I'm talking about, I am referencing the Seinfeld episode, of course, with Bryan Cranston in it, and I forgot what his name was in the episode, so sorry. But I'll try to post a little bit of that in the show notes or in a newsletter. And speaking of notes, my notes got lost. So this is all about showing sincerity. And what happens is you're going to have a sponsoring rabbi, someone that will say, I think that this individual is good for converting or is a good candidate for conversion, and they are interested, and they will take them to a Jewish court. And this is one of the things that Jewish courts do, is deal with the issue of conversion. These days, it's very interesting because there is a something called the I believe it's GPS, not global positioning system, but I think it's GPS, but it stands for, it basically is a overall rubric of what a person needs to do in order to be considered a Orthodox Jewish conversion. And this comes into play specifically when, let's say, somebody would potentially want to move to Israel. They would need to have this and need to show that they followed these, because for better or worse, the rabbinic people in Israel sometimes don't like the rabbis here in America that convert people, and that is problematic in a lot of different reasons. Tim Watley, thank you very much, Tim Watley. Yes. So I appreciate the reminder on that. I knew it was Tim something, and I could not remember the last name. So I appreciate that. And I know I just talked about that like earlier this week, and on Discord. So okay. So this process can last years. Sometimes, and it's a process that goes ahead, and people have to show their sincerity. People have to show a knowledge. They are given books to read, and I think that they're supposed to write essays as well, maybe on some of the topics, and they're asked questions, and it can be very intense, and sometimes during the conversion process, you are not supposed to be romantically involved with anybody as well. They might give allowances to, let's say, somebody who was already married, and let's say their spouse is Jewish, and they both want to become more Orthodox, more religious, and therefore they might make an allowance for that. I don't know, and that is something that you would have to ask your local Orthodox rabbi about. So there you go with that, and eventually, they will go ahead and have an immersion in a mikvah, in a ritual bath, and before that, they will be asked questions about whether or not they accept all of the commandments that God gave them, and they will be given, let's say, some stricter, do you accept eating kosher? Do you accept keeping Shabbos? And then they'll give you some lesser ones as well that they throw in there, to just show that you have to really, accept everything. It's not, you can't just say, well, you know what, I'd like to be Jewish, except for eating kosher, because I can't give up my shrimp. That's not going to fly. So, and shrimp doesn't fly either unless it's on the set of Blues Brothers and the shrimp cocktail scene for trying to find Mr. Fabulous Alan Rubin. And yes, again, I will try to find that scene and post it in show notes and the like. I really got to write this down because I want to make sure that I do this. Okay, so let's see here. No questions whatsoever? All right. Well, if that's the case, then this is going to be a really short show, and that's fine. And that is, I think, it. Once again, we would like, the royal we, I guess, would like to thank the moderators of the fifth column, the unofficial fifth column Discord server, and also for letting me use this space. And also, we would like to thank Logan for the music, for the intro music, and we'd like to thank Anonymous One for today's whose was it? Today's episode art for the episode. Like I said, it's very it's very manga-esque. I think I would say is really what struck me about it, and I really liked it. So we're going to use it, and I thank that individual, the anonymous one, for giving me that episode art. Anyhow, that is it. We will see you in 2 weeks' time. That looks like, if I can go to my calendar here, that looks like that will be the 16th. That sounds about right. Anyway, I am Aaron Benedict, and I am not a rabbi.